So next month, just to give you a heads up of what our next meeting will be, is What's Old is New Again, Optimizing Your Content for Generative AI with Robert. So, and then what you've all been waiting for is tonight's speaker. So Pradeek is with us. That is not your job title.
It's okay.
That,
I can pick it up.
so this is my last slide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this and stop sharing. And then I will let Pradeep introduce himself, and then he can share his slide deck, and we will listen to his lovely presentation. And we'll have some Q&A at the end. So by all means, jump in. If you have a question, put it in the chat. And we'll either stop and answer it while it's happening, or we'll answer it at the end. So thank you very much, Pradeep. Over to you.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak over here. I feel like it's one of the best opportunities and a platform to come and share ideas and thoughts. So once again, thank you. So hi, everyone. I am Prateek Zogekar. I am a senior product designer. I work at HubSpot. My main job is really working with consumer data, making sure that it's well structured. We do a lot of data handling in my team. I work on the growth side, so making sure that we take into account how we have it protected, how it is reliable, how to make sure that it's much more accessible to anyone within the teams is what my focus is. And today, the presentation or the work that I'm really passionate about and uh, I really enjoy and advocate quite a lot is neurodiversity in general. I am self-diagnosed dyslexic as well. So this is kind of a self-narration, self-story, the struggles that I've gone through from childhood all the way to working as a designer. Again, this is a spectrum, so the levels and intensity changes, but how this has really helped me shape my career as a designer and how contextual thinking has really helped me. So that's really what we'll be focusing on. Um, what are we going to talk about today is basically just an understanding of what neurodiversity is, what is dyslexia, then what are the shortcomings of dyslexia, and how we can use the strengths that are actually associated with dyslexia, which are in a way to help them nurture and be better, and how we can learn from those and be better designers ourselves. Since I've introduced myself, I'm going to skip the slide and move on. But let's talk a little bit about neurodiversity. So the experience and the way we really interact with the world is unique to every individual. And this doesn't necessarily need to be just neurodivergence, but neurotypicals as well. So if someone does not fit within the idea of what a socially accepted way of thinking, learning, or behaving is, that doesn't necessarily means that they or we should be consider those as their shortcomings. So Judy Singer was or is a psychologist from Australia, and she coined the term neurodiversity to begin with. Her daughter and her mother both are on the autism spectrum, and she realized that there is a need to understand what neurodiversity really means. So she argues that just like biodiversity is essential for ecosystem stability, neurodiversity could be essential for cultural stability, which is very interesting because if you think about it, ecosystem stability comes with all sorts of diverse animals, human beings, a part of it, trees, nature, etc. Similarly, having different diverse types of human beings, their behavior, personalities would really define what neurodiversity really is. So if you think about it, neurodiversity doesn't necessarily mean only those individuals who are different, but it is just a spectrum of individuals with different abilities, different thinking, different understanding, and the way they interact with the world. So um, I did a little bit of research around how many individuals are actually looking up neurodiversity, and what I saw was really outstanding. Like over the last 5 years, almost a 30% increase in the term of neurodiversity has been trending, which is great because now we can understand that individuals are more interested. Designers might be a part of that group set who are really interested and invested in understanding what neurodiversity is and how we can be better people and more inclusive towards it. Almost 15 to 20% of the world population is neurodiverse. So we have to account for those individuals whenever we come with ideas, whenever we want to create products which are much more inclusive and accessible. So if we think about what dyslexia is, which is a subset of neurodiversity. Now, neurodiversity has many disorders, which we currently categorize it as, but they should be considered as just differences, not disorders. So there are autistic people, there are dyslexic, there are people who have bipolar disorders, who have obsessive compulsive disorders as well. There are many on different sorts of spectrum. Today, we're going to focus on dyslexia. So dyslexia is actually a learning disability. They have trouble understanding, reading, and writing language, and they mostly make a lot of errors with spellings as well. So it is a neurological disorder at its origin, but typically it results with phonological, sorry, I always mess up this word, but phonological processing are the ability to break things down into manipulate sounds. So it's difficult for them to understand the world the way neurotypicals usually do. Dyslexics or dyslexia does not make them less intelligent or less creative. It just makes them difficult to understand what the norm expects, which is reading and language processing, and that makes them it makes it very challenging for them to interact with the world.
Pradeep, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. We're
Huh?
still seeing your intro slide, just the title slide. So,
Oh,
okay.
can you see that?
Now we're seeing things change.
Oh,
Yep.
perfect. Okay. All right. Sorry for that. Um, so where was I? Okay. So just going back and talking a little bit more about dyslexia is it really affects how they process information. And some people may need some alternative strategies to cope up with this. So when they fall short in one aspect of their life, it usually means that they have to cope up with some other aspects of their life which they need to enhance. It's similar to any physical disability, where if you are lacking with one sense, your other senses are heightened. It works in the similar way. So the way they cope up with the world is to make sure that they rely more on visual cues, landmarks, or moving patterns to orient themselves to this world and understand how things work in general. So if you look at this, these are some common patterns and errors that dyslexic individuals do. And this ranges from kids all the way to adults. Now, things might change as you grow and you learn, but they do make mistakes with understanding P's and Q's, D's and B's, so they interchange it a lot of times. Their reading speed is very different and slower than a neurotypical reading speed. So a neurotypical usually reads at 150 to 250 words per minute, but someone with dyslexia would read somewhere around 100 to 150. They often make mistakes when spelling out whether or whether. And it's not just the sense of writing it, but the understanding and the concept behind what it really means as well. Bear or bear, there or there. So you might see a lot of times they interchange the words. They also struggle with spellings. So symmetry, accommodate, separate, definite, definitions, all these sort of words, moderance, maintenance. So they struggle with that quite a lot as well. But let me preface this presentation a little bit. Let me say or start by saying that this is a generalized understanding of what dyslexia really is. That doesn't mean that every individual with dyslexia is or does go through all these issues. They are varied on varied spectrum, which means that some might face certain aspects while others don't. And it also doesn't necessarily mean that neurotypicals don't go through this. They do, but the intensity is a little different when you compare it with neurotypicals. All right. So I want you guys to meet Dan, who is a dyslexic designer. He is great at designing. He understands and perceives information excuse me, really differently, but he wants to improve his design skills. He wants to understand how design works, and he constantly struggles and strives to make sure that he has his design understanding better. He is dyslexic, as I mentioned, and so he has a lot of issues when it comes to dyslexia and general understanding, but then he has certain superpowers on which he relies quite a lot to make sure that he can use those in his work. So before we jump into the strengths, which we will also be learning from, let's look at the weaknesses or some shortcomings. So he has trouble understanding or doing things linearly in a linear fashion. So anything or any work or task that needs to be done in steps, he has trouble with that. So design workflows that require rigid sequence that they need to follow, such as building a style guide, then creating those designs, then prototyping, etc. That's where he struggles quite a lot. He also struggles with a lot of information overload, which means that he has difficulty processing a large amount of information. So if you have a huge text-heavy information or dense analytical data or just very overwhelming user research that you need to analyze, he has a lot of difficulty understanding and diagnosing through that information. The next one is he has a lot of problems with cognitive load and he gets stressed out really easily. So if there is something that he needs to read and understand, write, follow some organizational information, it takes a lot of effort for him to really comprehend that information, follow that information, and then process it to make sure that they go ahead with the work that uh, anyone in this context would be doing. In comparison, his peers are much more faster. They are more efficient when it comes to this in comparison to someone who has dyslexia. So is a it becomes a medium for them to burn themselves out quickly. They also have a lot of trouble with neurological and analytical data, which means that processing information, as I mentioned earlier, like data processing, analytical information, if there is a large data set, they need to find some pattern, it becomes difficult for them. However, this is also contrary to one of their strengths, which I'll mention a little later. But there is another learning disability called dyscalculia, which is associated with deficiency of understanding what or dealing with numbers. So this coexists a lot of times with dyslexia. And that's why it becomes a big challenge for anyone with dyslexia to really understand and comprehend numerical data and process that information efficiently. So now that we have understood what are the deficiencies or shortcomings, but Dan also has some amazing strengths on which he can rely on. And these strengths actually help him quite a lot when it comes to any design work that he does. So the first one is, the first one is approaching any problem with a holistic approach. So any individuals with dyslexia, or in this case, Dan, is naturally focused on the big picture. They don't get bogged down with the details at the beginning. They want to make sure that they understand the entire system so that they can dive deep and understand. And because of their understanding or holistic understanding, it's easier for them to dive deep and work on things which are much more granular. This also allows them to work on components or projects that have a large context. So it's easier for them to build systems which are much more complex rather than something which is much more specific. So think about a customer support system where you have to understand the whole ecosystem of how a customer reaches out, how they connect with a representative, what sort of communication do they have, and how that problem has been resolved. But there are ways to make this entire ecosystem of customer support a little bit better. And dyslexics have the ability to look at it from a big picture. So they will look at what the customer experience is, what is the team workflows, what are the technologies available, what are the business objectives, and how can they efficiently solve the problem by making sure that the customer gets all the intuitive experiences that they hope, but also helping our internal teams reach the problem resolution pretty quickly. The next one is pattern recognition. So they are, as I mentioned earlier, like they are really good at understanding and diagnosing and capturing these different patterns within any sort of information that you put in front of them. So if you have some form of analytical data that you have gathered from your user research, it'll be easier for them to find patterns and group them together and do some assumptions around it to make sure that your hypothesis is well structured. So they excel at spotting different sort of relationships in these complex systems. They can identify underlying structures or trends, design contexts, and make them adept at seeing connections between seemingly unrelated ideas or components, which usually, when you're in groups, you tend to overlook because you are focused on a hypothesis and you tend to overlook things which might be not necessarily relevant, but are indirectly affecting the work that you'll be doing. So for example, you can look at a checkout experience. Through pattern recognition, Dan can easily identify what the user behavior is, what are the industry standard patterns, and connect those ideas together to make sure that they are creating an experience which is much more intuitive. By constantly analyzing patterns in both the data as well as any sort of design trends that are trending at that point in time, he is able to craft experiences which are much more real, surreal, and gives a real world experience to users who are really there to use that product. So if you look at, if you want to improve certain things, then you can start looking into how to conduct data analysis, how to make sure you're capturing user feedback and looking at it from different angles. Also looking at heat maps and recordings and see if at all you can find some trends, some patterns that are being followed by pretty much every individual that is interacting with your system. Dan is also really good at spatial awareness and visual thinking, which means that visualizing how elements in design fits really well in the overall system is something which he's really great at. This kind of thinking allows him to easily manipulate objects or layouts in their mind, and they can actually formulate multiple solutions around it to make sure that they pick the right solution or share those multiple solutions with the team to get the right solution or move towards it. So again, think about a travel booking app or the home screen for a travel booking app. As he starts designing, he'll think about what or being using his spatial awareness, he'll think about what is the layout of the app, how the screen should be structured, what sort of intuitive experiences should be put, or what sort of features should be put. Is it thumb friendly? If is the navigation intuitive? And through visual thinking, he can craft some very clear visual hierarchy, create some good balance with white spaces, icons, text, and so on to make sure that the experience is well structured and useful. So again, if you want to think about how you can improve it, think about what is the available space for you, how can you typically track or understand how your eye moves around through the app, where do you look first, where do you look last, which is the touch-friendly zones, and the hierarchy of information so that you can utilize this information much more efficiently into your designs. Then he is also really good at multidimensional thinking. What it basically means is nonlinear thinking, which is you get the ability to understand context of what things are and how they are working, and simultaneously work on the experiences that you are doing for your specific project or feature. So you need to understand the technical feasibilities, any business objectives you have, the user experiences, and any allied information that your stakeholders have provided you can be used in the context of how you create these systems. They can basically shifting between different perspectives is really easy for them, which is essentially what a designer should strive for to create and build great design systems to begin with. And sorry, when I say design systems, I mean system thinking, where you have to make sure that you're creating products which are much more overarching rather than being specific to start off. So think about a multi-platform fitness app, for example, where you have different form factors. You have TV, you have laptops, you have your phone. Nowadays, there are mirrors on which you have your fitness apps. So how do you adapt to these different form factors? What are the expectations from different groups of users using these form factors? How can you make sure that each form factor still follows the same guidelines and gives out the same experiences, but they have their own tailored intuitiveness for that specific form factor? So this approach ensures that the app isn't just solving for what you're looking into, but make sure that you're keeping into account what you're going to be solving for the future, because different form factors and different expectations from users changes pretty quickly, and you have to account for those in the experiences that you're building and how you can make sure that they're weaved together correctly, because the data that is being shared on all these form factors still needs to be maintained. How are you going to do it? What are the technical limitations? What are the technical feasibilities around that? All of those things really need to be taken into account. Now, not necessarily that you will be focusing and working on all the form factors, but having the understanding of all the information that is available for you is really efficient for you to deliver something for your own work, which is going to be much more critical and intuitive for the experiences that you are planning to do. So as I mentioned, like if you want to work on those, we can start focusing on if there are different form factors, then how the experience changes on those and how those changed experiences can affect the work that you're doing. Are there any business model integrations that you have to think about when it comes to these different form factors, any technical constraints, and how to make sure that you are ready for scalability are the important issues to keep an eye out for. And the last one is cross-disciplinary thinking, which is, again, if you're working with multiple teams, if you're working with an umbrella idea where you are just one spoke to it, a spoke of it, then you have to make sure that you understand what the umbrella is all about to make sure that you can communicate and have a better communication and coordination with all the teams. So often developing strategies to work around these challenges is an important part. So you typically want to be a good collaborator, a good communicator, and integrate any inputs from various stakeholders is also a part of it. So if you look at a social sharing feature from the same fitness app, which we spoke about, then collaborating and with cross-disciplinary thinking, it will help you understand what's really happening with other facets of your project. So for example, if you're talking about social sharing, you want to make sure that you're also talking with marketing teams. You also want to make sure you're talking with your social managers, to understand what are the trends, to understand how you can better facilitate your social sharing features. And are there any additional onboarding sessions that you can implement? Are there any trends that you can capture? All these things are important when you do a cross-disciplinary thinking. And imagine it to be a workshop where you're bringing everyone together and making sure that you're understanding the concepts all together. Now here you need to understand any sort of market requirements, any technical feasibilities. You also need to account for any priorities because each team functions differently. So you want to make sure that you are accounting for that and any sort of timelines that you have to look into. So now that we have understood what are the strengths Dan possesses, let's look at how he can implement that to one specific example. So let's look at pricing pages. Seats or edit access for any specific tool is what Seats allows you. So you have a seat which gives you access to a tier of features, and then you can edit those and use those. And there are view only features, for which you don't necessarily need an edit seat. So looking at that, if we consider how Dan will be working is, let's say he is working on the in-app pricing page. So he has to make sure to look at the entire seats model holistically. So he has to communicate with fintech, the upgrades team or the marketing team, the trials team, legal, and any other relevant team to make sure that he is capturing all the information, the relevant information. If he has more information, great, that'll help him to understand the systems better, to understand the business goals, how can it be scaled. All those sort of information is really important when you think about taking a holistic approach to solving a problem. Then he can use he can also understand different patterns from their customers. So for example, if a team of only 10 users or a team of 10 users are going to use your product, their experience needs to be tailored. Their experience needs to be accounted for in comparison to a customer who has, well, let's say, 1,000 employees. So it's important to identify how each group is going to function, how each group is going to interact with your product, and what are the experiences that you want to make sure are consistent throughout the entire ecosystem, and where does your work fall in, and how you can make sure that you're solving that problem efficiently. Then having spatial awareness and visual thinking is basically allowing Dan to set clear layouts, having effective visual hierarchy, making sure that the designs are responsive, making sure that they are following the right design patterns, the right components, and it feels like a seamless experience, because that's what is important at the end. It doesn't need to feel like disjointed experiences where your in-app experience looks different with an upgrade experience. So to make sure that you're working closely with the teams to align and how you can make the experience a little bit better. Multidimensional thinking will allow Dan to balance the different team concepts and ideas, making sure that you're accounting for any billing frequencies, any potential growth, or future-proofing the product, and how you can make it a little bit more flexible to make sure that you're still keeping your product much more intuitive. Because let's face it, our industry is rapidly growing. We have new trends, new products to be launched. Recently, we identified AI as a huge asset. So adding that, creating a different pricing experience, making sure that we account for that in our seats model as well, is an important aspect of evolution. So how does Dan adopt to it? How does he keep intact with all the information and grasp it to make sure that the experiences are flawless, is something which he is really focused on as well. And the last one is collaboration and cross-disciplinary thinking, where input from all these varied teams, not just the teams, but engineers from those teams, product managers from those teams, any sales representatives or legal teams, would really fortify the whole concept of what the pricing page has to offer, to make sure that the seats model is well structured, to make sure that it's functional, it's clear, it is well aligned with what the business objectives are, and it is intuitive for for his users, is something which he needs to focus on. So if you look at this, the idea is just to give you a sense of how Dan would think. So he has his own double diamond system for his own team, the way he's functioning, but other teams also have their double diamonds. So keeping that into account, how do you collaborate with them if they are in discovery, but you are in define? If you are in development, but they are in discovery. So it needs to be an important identification of how the collaboration can be made effective. Future proofing really helps, and also making sure that you have an understanding of what their timelines are, what are their priorities, to make sure that you or your team is not necessarily a blocker for their work, or vice versa, to make sure that things go smoothly. And again, this is not necessarily your job responsibility, but having an understanding of how things function, what are the expectations, how effectively you can work, can really help drive the project as a designer for you. So that is the success of Dan, using his skill sets, using his um, edge of even he being dyslexic and he having those weaknesses can still function and be a great designer. By no means he is not focusing on all his weaknesses, because that's how we grow. Unless we know where we are weak at, there is no way you can improve. So knowing those weaknesses helps Dan to improve and understand systems better. His contextual thinking has been helping Dan a little bit better and creating experiences which are much more intuitive. So he can call himself a better system designer, even if there are things that he lacks, which he will continue improving. So just to wrap up, things that we need to keep in mind or we can learn from Dan are how we can be better at contextual thinking is really crucial. It helps designers create solutions that are well aligned with what the broader company strategy is, what the user needs are, what the business goal or objectives are for that specific, let's say, year, quarter, or whatever their vision is. And it's helpful for us to be better designers in general. So as you continue doing contextual thinking, it'll enable designers to understand the user environment, challenges, and behaviors, leading to more intuitive experiences by creating great user-centered design. Having a big picture thinking will encourage designers to consider how various elements such as different teams, technical constraints, business objectives from different teams as well, can come together and still build a product which is much more interactive and engaging. Having a sense of adaptability and inclusivity will account for any different contexts, such as any accessible needs, for example, any cultural differences or specific user scenarios. Because let's face it, our products are not necessarily for a specific market, but it could be for the entire world. So you have to account for different languages, you have to account for different ways of thinking, cultures, backgrounds, etc. So adapting to that and being inclusive is also an important piece. Being great at problem solving, which means that don't necessarily dive deep. First, understand the whole ecosystem, understand how the system functions, understand what the overarching idea that you're trying to solve, because that is going to be the root problem that you're trying to solve. And then you can dive in deeper into your specific whatever projects or features that you're trying to focus on, which are going to be targeting to that for that specific root cause. And then align with multiple teams. Make sure that you're communicating with other teams that are you're allied to, not necessarily directly or indirectly. It just helps understand how the company is running, how the company is functioning. Make sure that you, for example, attain any company calls, make sure that you go to any company meetings, make sure that you understand what's really happening with the company in general. That'll help you identify how you're solving a problem and how you're making that impact in general. And then start communicating with teams that are allied to you to make sure that you are solving a problem in general. So by thinking contextually, designers can really create solutions that are not necessarily only visually pleasing or appealing, but they're also functionally scalable and are deeply connected to what the real problem is, and also making sure that you're solving your business objectives and keeping your stakeholders happy. But that's really it. So again, thank you so much for hopping on the call. If you feel that you want to talk a little bit more about it, please connect with me and we can continue this conversation. I know we have a little bit of time, so I'll hand it back to you if you have any questions.
Yeah, so either you can put your questions into the chat or pop on and say them out loud. But in the meantime, I would like to ask you a couple questions. So you had stated at the beginning you're self-diagnosed, but and then you walked us through kind of these scenarios. What has been your biggest challenge that you found was that you experienced dealing with dyslexia and design and all those intricacies? And then how did you turn that into one of your strengths? Like, what would you say is your superpower now from it?
Great question. So it's always challenging when you come with a team and understand what's really happening, because let's say you join a new team right? You have a lot of information, structured documents, Figma files that you have to go through, connect with a lot of people to understand what they're working with. And each individual has a different learning style. So dyslexic individuals have really hard time understanding and reading documentation. So the easiest way to convert that to your strength is to actually connect with people and ask questions, ask them to walk through the experience, ask them to understand or help you understand what the earlier designer has done, if at all there was one. If there wasn't, how was the team functioning? What was the expectations? How were you communicating those ideas? What was the impact that you were making? It really helps because for me, I am much of a visual learner. So when I see something, when I actually get my hands dirty, it's easier for me to understand and learn and kind of adopt or onboard quickly rather than going through exhaustive documents, which are not really going to be helpful for me.
Great, thank you. Um, you mentioned AI. Have you dove into that and have you gotten anything? Because like I know the company I work for is very hesitant about embracing AI because they're afraid of like teaching the AI something from that we don't want them to know or doesn't want to get out and how employees could use it to help themselves without detriment to the company. Have you played around at all with that or?
Very good question again. But so there are a couple of tools. I think there is one called UI Motion, if I'm correct. But the tool really allows you to organize all your time. So what it does, it connects with your calendar, and you already have all your GitHub connections to it, your Jira connections to it. So it exactly knows what you're working on, how much time you are allotting to specific tasks, and it actually helps tailor all the work for you. So if a meeting gets canceled, it schedules a heads down time for you to focus on some tasks that are important to you. So it's an interesting AI challenge to be that or rather a challenge that they have focused on. But if you look at it, because uh, individuals with dyslexia, or to be honest, anyone who is neurodiverse, such as on autism spectrum or ADHD for that matter, have trouble focusing, if AI can really help them manage their work efficiently, then that would be beneficial for not just the company because they are going to produce work which is much more efficient and impactful, but for themselves as well as an individual to really understand how they can work around a system which is going to be helpful for them.
What was the name of that program again?
Let me look it up. I think it's called UI Motion.
Just remind you that you are sharing your screen. So
That's fine. That's fine.
good.
Scheduling or something. Motion, sorry. Use Motion, not UI Motion. So the AI calendar. So yeah, again, check it out. It's really interesting. It has great automations and AI in it.
Awesome. Well, we greatly appreciate your time. I don't see any other questions coming up in the chat, so thank you very much. If anybody does think of something, they have a way of getting a hold of you. You had your LinkedIn there. It is also available through our social. And um, thank you. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
I know.
Oh, thank you, Prati. Have a great day.